Hey there. Today we're going to attempt to make lasagna bolognese. I'm going to add my sofrito, which is just about equal parts of yellow onion, carrot, and celery. In my case, I think it was about 4 medium to large carrots, 1 very large onion, and a smaller kind of medium-sized onion, and then I think 3 stalks of celery. Making quite a bit here, so feel free to reduce those quantities if you are making a smaller lasagna. I'm going to saute that in a couple of tablespoons of olive oil just until it's fragrant, until the onions look a little bit transparent. I'm not trying to get any kind of color on them. And I realized that these were diced very finely, but every legit Italian that I saw make this from scratch diced them very finely like this for the Bolognese sauce. When I was a little kid, I used to watch Garfield like religiously, and Garfield was obsessed with lasagna. And so I, of course, always wanted to try lasagna, but I was sorely disappointed because the first time I ever ate lasagna, I thought it was disgusting. And what I didn't know is that there are different kinds of lasagna. And so the lasagna that I ate was some kind of Americanized version of lasagna napolitana. What's in it is really ricotta cheese, mozzarella, a ragu sauce that is made typically with some kind of sausage. And I'm just not a fan of all those things combined together. I particularly find ricotta off-putting when it's paired with a ragu. And most Italian sausage in America is really funky to me. So when I saw someone make lasagna alla Bolognese, I was like, that actually looks like I might like it. I would like to give that a try, so I decided to attempt to make it. What is very interesting to me is that there isn't any garlic. There was no garlic added to this, which I was like, dude, where's the garlic? But this is not the first time that I've been surprised by that. I think that in America, we think that garlic is synonymous with every single Italian dish there ever was. But it turns out a lot of Italian food does not contain garlic. And this classically, apparently, does not contain garlic. So for this next part, apparently you can use pancetta. And some people do this in reverse. Like some people actually kind of saute the pancetta, or sometimes they use bacon, or sometimes just ground pork, and then saute the vegetables in that. But I've seen it done either way, so I just decided to do it this way. So to this, we're going to add ground pork. It's not Italian sausage, it's just straight up ground pork. And we're going to add ground beef. And the ground beef to pork ratio looked like it was about 2-to-1. In my case, it was close to 2 pounds of beef to close to 1 pound of pork. I'm adding the pork in first, and I'm just going to chop that so that it crumbles into small pieces. We're just really going to season this very, very lightly too with just salt and pepper. And once the pork is kind of cooked a little bit, then I'll go ahead and add the beef in. And again, saute that, break it up into small pieces, seasoned very lightly, just salt and pepper. So I don't really know if there's a very specific kind of tomato that's supposed to go in the ragu. We're going to use San Marzano tomatoes, though, canned tomatoes. I got 2 large cans, and they come whole, so I just sort of mash them up with my masher. Do not put them in a blender. When you blend up tomatoes, what happens is, especially when they're whole like that and they have all of the seeds, you're basically like blending up all of those seeds. And if you've ever just eaten a tomato seed solo, it has a very distinct and kind of bitter flavor. So when you blend it and you grind those up, you are just making your tomato sauce taste bitter. So don't do that. Just hand crush them with a fork, crush them with a masher. Just don't break up the seeds in a blender. So we're going to put 2 cans of that in here. And San Marzano tomatoes do not taste like your standard canned American tomatoes. They taste way different. They're very mild. They're a little bit sweeter. They're a little bit tangy. They just taste really, really, really pleasant. And they must have a lower acid content or something, because if you eat a San Marzano tomato straight out of the can, it doesn't taste like can. Like if you eat an American canned tomato out of a can. It literally just tastes like a can. You're supposed to put some dry white wine in here, but I don't have any dry white wine, so we're going to skip that step. I am definitely going to make this again with dry white wine someday, just because I do think that would have been a really nice addition to the ragu, but because I don't have it, we're just going to omit it. Add a couple tablespoons of tomato paste. I added one of those whole tubes of tomato paste. The seasoning was extremely basic, just salt and pepper. There wasn't any kind of dried herbs, no oregano, no basil, no garlic powder, no onion powder, none of that. Just salt and pepper. That's how I saw them do it, so that is how we did it. Because I'm making this in an Instant Pot, which is a pressure cooker, I am going to pressure cook this for 2 hours. So I'm going to put the lid on, allow it to come up to pressure for 30 minutes, pressure cook for 2 hours, and then allow it to have a natural release for 30 minutes. So in total, 3 hours. If you are doing this on a stove, you really just need to simmer it for 2 hours. If it gets too thick, you're supposed to add some kind of beef stock to it. I read differing accounts on this. So some accounts say that you're supposed to refrigerate this overnight and use it the next day because it deepens the flavor. But I saw other more like authentic Italians making it, and they did not do that. They used it right away. So we're just going to use it right away. I have a theory that because quite frankly, it would be very hard to eat all of this lasagna in one day, that because I was going to eat it the next day, that the flavor would deepen just in the lasagna into the next day. So to make the nudes, and we're making them from scratch, we need to use 00 Italian flour. Apparently, that is just what you're supposed to use. If a recipe calls for 00 flour, try to find it, try to use it. It genuinely does taste different, and it has a totally different texture. It is legitimately different. What I was kind of unclear about was whether or not the noodles were actually spinach flavored. So Lasagne alla Bolognese comes from Emilia-Romagna, Bologna. And there's another kind of lasagna that comes from the same area, which is Lasagne alla Ferrese. And that one is from Emilia-Romagna, Ferrara. And that one apparently uses spinach noodles. So I don't know if it just is something that I happen to see someone make Lasagne alla Bolognese that was from that area and did spinach noodles. I don't really know. But we're making spinach noodles. And especially because I saw this lady do the most badass thing I've seen in a really long time. I have made spinach flavored noodles before, and it was really ridiculous because you had to like pre-cook this spinach and chop it up and all this lunatic stuff. I legit saw this lady take fresh as spinach, put it right in a food processor with the flour, and just blend it up and then make the noodles. How freaking genius is that? So it looks like I used about 2 cups of flour and then a lot of spinach. I was a little bit worried here that I had used too much spinach. And I do think that I used a little bit too much spinach in the end. Not because it tasted bad. It actually tasted really nice. But because I think that it was kind of noticeable that if the dough was a little bit too thin, it didn't quite have the structure to totally stay together. So maybe a little less spinach was needed, but it had a great spinach flavor. So we're to this. I don't really know what the real ratios here are. So I have made pasta before. I'm just kind of making it up, just winging it Iron Chef style here. So we're going to use 5 egg yolks and see where that lands us. This mystically seemed to work out. I somehow got all of that spinach flour incorporated into this one single dough ball without adding any kind of extra liquid at all. So, all right. So once you get it all incorporated and everything, you can kind of knead it for a little while, and then you just want to cover it and leave it out on the counter to rest for about 20 to 30 minutes before trying to roll the noodles. We're going to use the pasta sheeter attachment for the KitchenAid to roll out the noodles. Rolling out noodles by hand is not that bad. Truly, it's really not that bad. With this much dough, though, unless you've been rolling noodles for most of your life, you probably want to cut it into thirds or even quarters and roll it by hand that way. So especially if you let the dough rest, it relaxes and it's considerably easier to roll out very thinly. Even with the attachment, we're still going to cut this into thirds and roll it out this way. The sheets can get really, really long when you're doing this and just become extremely cumbersome. So we need to generously flour this before this can go into the KitchenAid. And don't worry if at first, when you very first try to feed it in, it starts to like kind of fall apart and tear and all of that kind of stuff. You can just keep going, keep adding more flour. Keep letting it go through the machine. It will eventually kind of smooth out. I feel like this dough is a little bit different because it has that spinach in it. And the spinach kind of, as it's being pressed like that is going to release some liquid. So for some of these, it took adding more flour, rolling it through, adding more flour, rolling it through quite a few times. And you always want to do this on the widest setting. I think it's like number 1 or 0 or something like that. I don't really know. But I rolled these out all the way to 5. I didn't go any thinner than that because I didn't really think that it would hold up. I just thought that the sheets would break apart. How I do this typically with the KitchenAid attachment is that I will, on the lowest setting, I will feed it through until it's smooth, and then I will fold it in half and feed it through twice, and then increase the setting. Feed it through, fold it in half, feed it through twice, increase the setting, and continue to do that all the way till I hit the desired width that I want. So again, this was all the way to 5. I did see some account of saying that for lasagna, the pasta should be rolled to 7, which is really, really very thin. And the way that the pasta was working, the way that it was feeling when you were handling it, I just knew that if you were to boil this pasta, it would just fall apart if it was any thinner than this. After all of the pasta is rolled out, and you want to flour the pasta generously after you roll it out, because if you do not, it will stick to itself and you will just end up with a horrible event. Lay the pasta sheets down into whatever pan you're going to use and cut them to size so that you have a much easier time of just cooking the noodles and then laying them down and layering the lasagna. So I read that the lasagna is supposed to be 7 layers, and I believe that's 7 layers of pasta. So you want to make sure that when you count, you have enough. In this case, I would have needed 14 sheets, but you also probably want some extra because it is inevitable that something is going to go wrong with at least some of the pasta sheets. In a large pan with some heavily salted boiling water, go ahead and add the sheets in. These only take like literally 60 seconds. So you just want to cook them until they start to float to the top. And then you want to take them out and dunk them in some very ice cold water. And then take the sheet and lay the sheet on something. I used paper towels and actually found that it worked pretty well. So you know how they have like those half sheets of paper towels? I laid them on the half sheets of paper towels and just kept stacking them. And it was okay. There were some snafus. So this I found to be probably the hardest part about making lasagna was just dealing with pre-cooking the noodles. But apparently pre-cooking lasagna noodles is better. Although I do know that you don't have to pre-cook the lasagna noodles. I have just heard that it's better. I have never tested that at all. So one of the things that I found was that I was right about the pasta. It was very, very easy to break. So I do think there was a little bit too much spinach going on in here. So I ended up having to use this spider basket and this other little thing and very gently sort of pulling them out. And then once I got them in the very cold water and everything, it was okay after that. And they kind of stopped breaking up. I also felt like my choice of pan to do this was excessively stupid. So this is just a really weird, shallow pan. It was just a really large pan that I had. And I would recommend using a kettle of boiling water over this. One of the bad things that happened was because all of the starch kind of kept coming out, all of that flour that you saw coating that, and it would thicken up the water. So then I would need to dump it and refresh the water. So it was a little bit annoying in that way. It took a little bit of time, and I forgot to hit record when I was going to go make the bechamel sauce. So just kind of walk you through it. I added probably about 1 entire stick of butter is what you're going to need for this. You want to put it over kind of medium heat, let it come up, turn frothy, and then you want to add in some flour. I think I added in about a cup of flour. Maybe something like that. It was between 1/2 and 1 cup of flour. And then continuously stirring that, we just kept on cooking it until it smelled a little bit, I guess, toasted. You're really cooking out a lot of that flour taste. So it does take a little while. And then to that, I was just slowly pouring in some dairy. Now, I think that most of the recipes that I read called for milk. And I ended up using 1/2 and 1/2 with some water added to it. I didn't really have milk. I don't typically keep milk in my house, but I think that probably worked out better in my favor just because 1/2 and 1/2 is got quite a bit of fat in it, with the cream. And I typically like cream and have a hard time with milk. So I've never liked milk, not even when I was a child. I always thought it was kind of weird, tasted weird, smelled weird, was hard for me to even really eat cereal. We just want to slowly add in the dairy, just a little bit at a time, continuously stirring. And don't worry if it gets like a little bit clumpy, bumpy or whatever, just keep whisking it and it will smooth out. And then you want to go ahead and add some salt. And this part freaked me out a little tiny bit. Nutmeg. So that's not as weird as it seems. Nutmeg was a staple spice in a lot of European cooking. So it's not that weird. It's just I've had my fair share of shitty experiences with the nutmeg. If you use too much nutmeg, it can just make things taste like soap. So my recommendation would be to add maybe just a little bit of nutmeg at a time and then taste it and then keep going so that it doesn't get that kind of awful taste. I was very shy on the nutmeg here, so I'm going to guess that I probably added in maybe like 1/2 teaspoon, maybe even 1/4 teaspoon. It wasn't very much. That will continue to cook on low heat, and it will become, you do need to monitor it. You do need to stir it quite frequently. It will become very thick eventually. This is what the Bolognese sauce ended up looking like after it had been pressure cooked for about 2 hours. I gave it a quick taste test. It tastes pretty delicious. So there's one more thing about the Bolognese sauce that's supposed to go in there after, like at this point, after it's completely cooked. I believe that you're supposed to add milk to it. I did not add milk to it because it was going in the lasagna with the bechamel sauce. I guess I didn't really feel the need to add milk to it. All right, assembly time. So we're supposed to add a thin layer of the Bolognese sauce to the bottom of the pan, and then we can go ahead and start doing layering like normal. We're going to lay down the spinach noodles, and then we're going to lay a thin layer of the Bolognese sauce on top of that, and then we're going to put some of the bechamel on top of that, and then we're going to put fresh grated Parmesan on top of that. And we're supposed to do this 7 times. I messed up and only did it 6 times because I can't count. I also just want to point out that this is once again an Italian food that is colored like the Italian flag. So that seems to be like a really common thing. I actually think it's really cool that there seems to be so much pride in their country that they create food that is literally representative of the pride that they have. While doing research for this video, I also saw a lot of really strange content about why Italians stay so skinny, eating all these carbs and cheeses and meat sauces and everything else. And yeah, no, there is legit a reason. It's because anytime you make any kind of Italian dish, it's basically like running a marathon. This took so freaking long to make. I think I was probably standing in my kitchen for no less than like 6 hours today. That like making lasagna is almost like a full-time day job. And yes, you could just buy the noodles, but I don't like I've had lasagna with purchased noodles and it is nowhere near as good as homemade noodles. Added to that, these are spinach noodles and not just spinach noodles, fresh spinach noodles. That's just like it's really hard to get around that. I would highly recommend not trying to cheat on the bolognese sauce. It will never be as amazing as it is if you actually make it. The bechamel sauce, of course, you kind of have to make. And it kind of like the bechamel sauce coupled with the fresh grated Parmesan cheese, because Parmesan cheese has a little bit of saltiness to it. It tastes like Alfredo sauce, but like really good Alfredo sauce, not Alfredo sauce that you buy in a jar. It tastes totally different from that. It's a wonderful, wonderful experience. So you can't really cheat on any of those things and have the same experience. For the top, what you want to do is put down a layer of the bolognese sauce and then the bechamel sauce and a really heavy kind of thick layer of the bechamel sauce and then a very thick layer of the Parmesan cheese. That's going to get all nice and bubbly and crusty and brown and just be absolutely delicious. Get at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for about an hour until that Parmesan is nice and brown and crusty and bubbly. Mine was a little bit too brown, but that's because I have a split oven and I baked it in the split oven. So the top was very close to the top heating element, which was perfectly fine. It wasn't exactly burnt or anything. It was just a little darker than I had intended. With some of the pasta scraps that I had from cutting the noodles, I decided to just kind of make a quick little pasta and test the bolognese sauce and stuff. It was absolutely delicious. I've noticed something about some Italian dishes. There's just such a clean, beautiful way of preparing them. So like with the bolognese sauce, there's not a ton of herbs and spices in there covering up the flavors of the ingredients. Instead, those ingredients, they're just allowed to completely and totally shine through. Like when you taste that bolognese sauce, you're tasting those tomatoes. You're not tasting basil or oregano or garlic. You're tasting tomato. And then you taste the pork, you taste the beef. There's a richness to it because of the fat from the meat. It's really, really delicious in a very nice, refreshing, clean way. Look, all I am saying is that if reincarnation is a real thing, I just want to be reincarnated in Italy. After you take this out of the oven, you just want to let it cool for maybe half an hour to an hour, and then you can go ahead and slice it and eat it. Look at that crazy like bechamel, Parmesan, oozy cheesiness. That was just like delicious looking. I'm pretty sure that Garfield was actually always eating lasagna alla Bolognese. That's absolutely fabulous. It was so hard to just eat like one piece of this and wait until the next day to eat more. Like really, really hard. This is the next morning and I'm pretty sure that I ate a little tiny bit more. I don't think that was my original size. So... Is a food that takes literally like an entire day out of your life to make worth making? Abso-freaking-lutely. Like this is absolutely to die for. It's so freaking delicious. I would eat this every single day for months. It's that delicious. Is it worth making every day? Absolutely not. I don't have that kind of stamina, but it's worth making a huge quantity of it and then freezing it so that you can just kind of have it whatever. I also want to apologize to all the Italians out there, just in case I messed anything up. I did my best.